From the above specimen, and it is but a hasty and imperfect one, of the evils, constitutional and practical, of the prelatic establishment of these lands, it cannot certainly be thought strange that we would deeply deplore and earnestly deprecate the apathy, and in many instances positive dislike and contempt with which our testimony against this monstrous system has long been regarded by a large proportion of our Presbyterian fellow countrymen. And much less can it be thought strange that we should deeply deplore and most earnestly deprecate the disposition of late years so unequivocally manifested upon the part of our Scottish establishment to fraternize with the Church of England and identify her very existence with the upholding of it, that the worldly politician, who regards all such questions with the jaundiced eye of a mere temporizing expediency, should, in considering her enormous wealth and the interested favor of the great and powerful, which she has so long and largely enjoyed, esteem a more intimate alliance with her tower of strength in the day of trial, for the comparatively poor and friendless Kirk of Scotland, is not at all wonderful. But that Christian men, yea, our learned and godly divines, who profess to take their stand upon the high and firm footing of decided Bible principle, should be led away with and give currency to this delusion, is both astonishing and lamentable. Already, indeed, a little reaction has begun to take place upon the subject, and by we doubt not its folly and infatuation will be generally felt and acknowledged. For who does not see that the present difficulties of the Church of Scotland are rendered tenfold more perplexing by the incorporating union and her consequent political connection with the Prelatic establishment? Had we a Scottish Parliament, as in the time of the Second Reformation, we should not despair of seeing patronage at no very distant day completely abolished, and the Church's spiritual independence once more fully recognized. But alas, when these vitally important topics, which are now menacing the very existence of the Scottish establishment, have to be submitted to the British legislature, in which there is an overwhelming majority of Episcopalians, the issue, we fear, through the ignorance of some, the hostility of others, and the apathy of all, must be exceedingly doubtful. The spiritual lords in particular are not very promising judges of such questions, for they know well that the abolition of patronage and the recognition of spiritual independence in the Church of England would completely revolutionize her. And in these points are conceded, and if these points are conceded to Scotland, the contagion might cross the border. Both principle and enlightened expediency require, therefore, that this fraternizing should be forthwith and forever discontinued. What? Identify the fate of the Presbyterian Church of Scotland with the English Prelatical establishment? Of the downfall of the latter, there can be no more doubt than of the overthrow of papacy itself. The very breath of the millennium will blow them both away. Let the Church of Scotland prove true and single-hearted in her loyalty to her glorious head, and retrace her steps till she reach the ancient firm footing of the covenanted uniformity. And, should she even be severed from the state, we tell her that she has naught to fear. No, no. Rooted in the affections of a united Christian people, and enjoying the protection, favor, and blessing of the King of Zion, she will shine forth with a moral splendor and glory, altogether unknown since the era of the Revolution. But if she fawn upon and crouch before prelatists, sometimes appealing to their generosity, and sometimes working upon their fears, representing herself as the ally of the venerable sister establishment, and suggesting that her downfall will assuredly involve that of prelacy, and if indeed this were a catastrophe, not to be contemplated but with grief and horror, then we fear that her worst forebodings will be realized, and if she perish, hanging as a mere pentacle in the skirts of the Church of England, she will fall unhonored and unwept, a worthless and degraded thing. Thou also shalt be ashamed of Egypt, as thou wast ashamed of Assyria. Yea, thou shalt go forth from him, and thine hands upon thine head, for the Lord hath rejected thy confidences, and thou shalt not prosper in them. Say ye not, a confederacy, to all them to whom this people shall say, a confederacy, neither fear ye their fear, nor be afraid. Jeremiah 2, verses 36 and 37, as well as Isaiah 8, verse 12. Nor can it be thought strange farther that we should have strong conscientious scruples in regard to the propriety of yielding unqualified allegiance to the British Constitution, of which the prelatical establishment forms an integral part. The sentiments and practice of Reformed Presbyterians upon this head have been unsparingly assailed, and it seems by many to be thought almost self-evident that here at least we are wrong. Let the whole circumstances of the case be calmly and candidly considered, however, and we despair not of obtaining a much more favorable verdict. We publicly and solemnly profess adherence, it must be remembered, to the great principles, both civil and ecclesiastical, of the Second Reformation. Now these were formally set aside at the Revolution settlement, or rather left buried in a dishonored grave under the incumbent weight of the infamous Act Recissory, which is still unrepealed. We had no alternative, therefore, but either abandon our principles or dissent from and testify against the present complex constitution. Had we adhered merely to the ecclesiastical part of the Second Reformation, we might have satisfied ourselves with dissenting from the established church. But inasmuch as we approve the civil part also, our dissent and protest must necessarily partake of a civil character. This arises from the nature of the case. Besides, in the Solemn League and Covenant we pledge ourselves to endeavor the extirpation of prelacy, but by unqualified allegiance to the British Constitution, we should necessarily stand bound to uphold this system, which would involve us not merely in palpable inconsistency, but even perjury. Believing, therefore, that the prelatical establishment of these lands, which is an essential part of the Constitution, is, as we have attempted to prove, unscriptural and anti-Christian, and believing that the royal supremacy, according to which it is a fundamental principle of the Constitution that the sovereign is head of the Church, is a daring and even blasphemous invasion of the inalienable prerogatives of the reigning mediator, our allegiance to him compels us to refuse allegiance to that Constitution. When Caesar claims what is due to God alone, the line of duty is plain. We must obey God rather than man. Caesar cannot have our loyalty on such terms. From long and painful experience, we are, alas, well aware of the difficulties, sacrifices, and obloquy connected with this position, but we dare not recede. Renouncing voluntarily all claim to share in the honors and emoluments of the state, it is our desire and our aim to demean ourselves as good and peaceable citizens. To our native land we are ardently attached by the recollections and endearments of both piety and patriotism, for her peace and prosperity, and for the temporal and eternal zeal of all ranks of her inhabitants. We constantly and devoutly pray, and our object is to bring back our fellow countrymen and fellow Christians to the good old paths in which our fathers trode, to lead them to discard prelacy, and prosecute to their high and holy consummation the grand ends of the covenanted Reformation. Speedily, oh speedily, may the time come when our officers shall be peace, and our exactors righteousness, our walls salvation, and our gates praise, when we shall no more be termed forsaken, neither shall our land be any more termed desolate, but then we shall be called Hephzibah, and our land Beulah, for the Lord delighteth in us, and our land shall not be married. And our land shall be married. Nor, finally, can it be thought strange, after what has been advanced, that Reformed Presbyterians should cherish profound respect for the memory and the principles of these holy and devoted men, by whose exertions and sufferings the prelatical yoke in connection with arbitrary power was averted from our land, and the inestimable blessings of civil and religious liberty secured to unborn generations. We are well aware that in certain quarters it has been common and fashionable to represent the Scottish martyrs as wild and mischievous fanatics, who were enemies to lawfully constituted authority both in church and state, impatient of everything like restraint and subordination, and who threw away their lives in a kind of wantonness of enthusiasm. From the pen of the novelist and writers, not a few of a less imaginative cast, have these effusions of falsehood and bitterness copiously flowed, and time was when such vile caricatures were received as gospel, and ministered food for profane merriment to shallow-pated, cold-hearted, recreant Presbyterians, and when the principles and even characters of the nicknamed Cameroonians, their descendants, were esteemed the very consummation of all that is absurd and ridiculous. Thank God these times have passed away, and it is beginning at last to be felt and acknowledged that the Covenanters died not as a fool dieth, but laid down their lives in defense of the highest and holiest principles for which free men and Christians can contend. At the expense of all that is dear to the human heart, they contend for the headship of Christ over the church and over the nations, for the spiritual independence of his spiritual kingdom, for the sacred and inalienable privilege of the worshipping of God of the God of their fathers, according to the requirements of his blessed word, and for that civil liberty which is the birthright and boon of every freeborn Briton. Looking upon their own sufferings and their own lives as nothing, and regarding themselves as the conveyancers of truth and freedom to coming generations, they opposed a determined front against prelatical encroachment and arbitrary power, kindled upon the mountains and moors of our native land the sacred fires of civil and religious liberty, and have thus bequeathed to us, their ungrateful posterity, unnumbered and inestimable blessings, and to coming ages an example worthy of all imitation, and never to be forgotten. That they were mere human beings we know, and that they had their own share of human frailties and failings we know, but of them the world was not worthy, and, as they deserve, they shall be held in everlasting remembrance. Till there be a return, to the great principles for which they contended, and till prelacy that shed their blood be completely overthrown, we firmly believe that our distracted land will enjoy no solid and permanent peace. When the Lord shall build up Zion, he shall appear in his glory. Psalm 102, verse 16.